Hello, welcome back to the studio. This week, have you ever thought that starting oil painting might be a little bit overwhelming? Well, I've taken the top 6 questions that you ask and give you some answers to them whilst I'm painting this little scene. We'll take a look at some of the essential supplies. Questions like, what is fat over lean? And how long do oil paintings take to dry? You'll also want to stick around for my beginner's top tips. That's right, all those little extras that, well, the pros don't always tell you. So the first question, what are the basic things I need to get started with an oil painting? Well, you need just 3 main things. Firstly, something to paint on. And size-wise, I suggest you go no smaller than sort of a 9 by 12. Let me just double check that size. Yeah, that's 9. My broken ruler says it's 9 by 12. And the temptation is to go really titchy tiny small, and I'm going to urge you don't do that. So 9 by 12, the smallest size canvas you need. This is paper, of course, and you can paint on a canvas board. Just make sure that the surface is not absorbent. In other words, if it sucks in the oil paint too quickly, you're going to be in trouble. So make sure it's a primed canvas you're painting on, or canvas paper, whatever it is, make sure it's primed. I paint mine grey with some grey gesso, or you can use grey acrylic paint. Whatever it is, just make sure that it's completely sealed. Paints-wise, well, things have changed quite a bit. Back in the day when I started painting on cave walls, we didn't have these sorts of paint. Nowadays we have these things, which are water mixable oil colours. And for a completely beginner, these are the sort of things I would probably say get now. It means you don't have to have thinners around the house. You can just use soapy water to wash your brushes off. They're very friendly to use. You can also obviously wash your hands much more easily without using any kind of a solvent. So I would definitely say as a beginner, go for water mixable oil colours. Go with that, you're going to want some of this. And this is water mixable linseed oil. It doesn't actually say that on the bottle, but that's the product I would use. Definitely water mixable linseed oil. That's to thin your paints down, because some of them are thick and some of them are thin. And we need to regulate how much we have of each, but I'll get into that in a minute. And of course, brushes. There's as many brushes as there are sticks that you can shake at an art shop. My suggestion, a couple of square-ended flat brushes, a nice flat brush, a liner brush, maybe a little detail brush. Don't spend a fortune on these things, but in the same breath, don't go too cheap. I see so many beginners just buying one of these really big cheap sets of paints and brushes from a discount store, going home and painting and having a real miserable time of it. The brushes are terrible and the paints, well, no better. Spend a few pounds on your brushes, but definitely don't go spending a fortune. I think this lot of brushes in my hand probably cost no more than maybe 10 quid. And I think some of these were donated, so go and check out your charity shops. Look for some brand name ones. You can pick them up for pennies. You might also want to get yourself a cheap palette knife. This isn't a cheap palette knife, but you can certainly pick up this sort of design very cheaply in the discount stores, and then you can really go quite cheap, because a palette knife's a palette knife pretty much. So the only other brush you might want to get is something like a fan brush. They're very useful. Okay, but you really only need maybe 1 fan, a couple of flats, a liner. So keep it very, very simple. Don't give yourself a ton of kit to worry about. You just don't need it. The next question is, what shall I paint? Well, I always tell people to pick something simple. Now, when I say simple, I mean something like this. This is what I would call a really nice, sort of simple beginner's painting, because really there's actually only one thing in it that you need to really kind of pay attention to, which is this gate. The rest of it, well, is what I call a movable feast. If your trees are in a different position, if the background's a little different, it doesn't really matter, as long as you can paint a decent gate. One simple subject, nicely positioned in this bottom corner, gives you a lot of scope. And if it doesn't work out, as long as you've got a nice gate, well, the rest of it will tend to make its own mind up about what it's doing. Quite often, I'm afraid, beginners tend to pick something complicated, like where they've got like a mountain and a river, lots of fir trees, lots of different subjects, all of which you've got to fit together on a canvas. It's not always easy to do something like that, whereas I say, pick something with just one feature, like a nice gate. Before I start answering any more questions, I think we better get some painting done. And for this, as I say, simple subject to do, I'm going to use a pencil. I'm actually going to sketch it out onto my canvas here. First thing I want to do is drop in the horizon line. You can see actually, in fact, that's just a little bit under halfway, so that's nice and easy. Drop in the horizon line, doesn't have to be straight. And we've got this sort of nice sort of shape here on the side. How far does that come across? Now, bearing in mind, I picked this one because it fits nicely onto a 9x12. It's about an A4 sheet of paper size, so about right. So a little bit less than that. So I'm just looking at that distance there. And it kind of comes up to there, doesn't it? And it comes down to not quite halfway. Boom, so down to about there. And we've got a little bit of something creeping in on this side. Leave yourself a little bit of a window there to peek through in the centre, and that comes down there to the base of this gate. Down to about there. So we got the sort of hole, sort of like a zigzag shape, isn't it? It's nice and simple. And somewhere in this hole, beneath the horizon line, we have to fit in a gate, and that really is quite straightforward. That gate post there, a little bit more than halfway. Okay, so just drop in a gate post. There we are. Got the gate post here, not too close to the edge. There's a tree back there as well, so maybe drop that in just there. I think that's about right. Now this is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bar gate. Bit of a classic in here in the UK. Maybe it is where you live. So we just need 5 simple bars. So I think that's it. A very nice, simple little basic drawing to start us off. Now then, let's ask another question, I think. I stood back and I think I'll make my gate a bit small. Let's make it a bit bigger. I'm just going to take a regular rubber, rub this out and sketch it again. Maybe we should add that to the art supply list with a pencil. There, I think that's going to be a bit better, maybe easier to paint as well. Having got our drawing done, we need to put out some paint. It's in a tube, we need something to put it on. Now, a lot of you are tempted to buy one of these things, and it's one of these little cheap wooden pallets. Please don't do that. These things are, well, as good as useless. Apart from the fact that the first thing you do is get paint all over your thumb. They're too small, you just can't use them. And I like to use something like this, just a simple plastic tray. This one, of course, was by a well-known confectioner. I ate the contents for the sake of this video. Maybe. And one of my all-time favourites is to use something like this. And this is Reynolds freezer paper. It's plastic-coated paper. It comes on a nice big roll, and you can just glue a piece of this into the bottom of that tray. I think you've got a handy lid to put over it so that your little cats don't walk all over it. I think that's an idea for the future. And I can put my paint out. So here's my DIY palette. And okay, it's a bit on the small side, but I thought it was a good idea, so I'm going to stick with it. Typical man, I'm afraid. But as you see, my mixing area is a little bit on the small side, but I can put the lid over it and feel happy that I've made something useful out of something which would end up in landfill. So let's start off by looking at our painting, our photograph rather, and see what we've got to do. Now, traditionally we will start off by working with the thing furthest away. We obviously wouldn't paint the gate first and then try and paint the field. That doesn't make sense, does it? So, background, what have we got? Well, not much. A bit of hazy looking grey sky. The suggestion of some nice trees in the distance, and again pretty hazy, and some sort of hazy green colours here. The word hazy and low detail are all symptomatic of things that are further away in our painting. We don't really get into any of the detail and the colours until we get much closer, and because there isn't much there to paint, we don't have to take much time to paint it. Now, that's pretty much a golden rule. If you can't see it, don't spend much time on it. let's paint a bit of sky and make up a little bit of a greenish colour. I've put a few drops of linseed oil into my little dish. Again, it's an old fruit pot, and I've got a little flat 1/2 inch brush here. I'm going to take just a small amount onto my brush. Now, again, you don't want to swamp your brushes with oil painting mediums. This painting doesn't require a lot of anything. It's got a bit of a skin on it, but it's okay. So put a little bit of oil through your brush first of all, and then tap off the surplus. And the reason why I say that is because if you don't, you'll end up swamping your canvas, making it really wet. I think it's a common mistake. So I just dabbed off a little bit of that colour, and it's a very pale blue-grey sky. I'm going to go straight into some titanium white and just touch into it a little drop of French ultramarine blue. I just want a hint of colour. And it does say it doesn't want to be too wet. And you can see I get the lights from my studio to shine. You can see it's got a slight glossiness to it, which is perfect. Now, I'm not going to worry too much about my background sky. As I say, there's an awful lot more painting to do. So at this stage, what I really want to do is just to block in something. This is all going to be much darker on the outside edges. And you're going to see a few little holes through my foliage. So I'm going to just drop this in and make it go a little bit bigger. I find that most of the time when I've been teaching class, which I've been doing for many moons, people get really nervous about these initial stages. Putting paint onto a little canvas it's frightening, isn't it? It's really nervous, and you can touch the collywobbles. But really, honestly, folks, what's the worst thing that could happen? You throw it away. But you learn something from it. And one thing you're learning is that as I'm painting, I'm rubbing out my lines. But it doesn't matter, I can see just about enough. Now, I'm going to put trees over this bit here, so I'm not going to worry too much about that. I don't think I need to do much more on those outer edges, maybe just a little bit more in here. But you see, painting over that pale grey background, I can see the colours. If this was pure white, none of this would show up. My little bit of sort of a greyish blue colour there would just not show up at all. It's the reason why I like using a neutral grey canvas. And if you can do that as a beginner, this will help you out tremendously. Now, let's think about making some colours for some background trees. One of the things I suggest you do is to do something like this. Make yourself a colour chart, because when you're starting out as a beginner, knowing what colours make what colours when you mix them together is a bit of a chore, isn't it? You don't really know what you're getting into. So what I did is I put some highlighting colours, the pale bright colours like yellow, ochre and a crimson colour there along the top, and I put some of the darker colours, the blue, the green and another alizarin crimson there, because these are sort of similar. And then I just mixed them together and I made myself this little chart. It means when I want to see a little pale green colour for my background, I can look at my chart. And I know that French ultramarine blue and cad yellow, they make a sort of a nice pea green colour. I reckon that would do nicely for my field. And if I want to go slightly darker, well, I could probably add a little bit of alizarin crimson to it. I could probably go towards that end. Maybe even something like that. French ultramarine and yellow ochre. Okay, so let's mix up some colour. See if we can make a nice green colour for those background trees. I'm going to brush mix these together. I rather like the look of that phthalo green and yellow ochre. So I'm going to use that same brush that I used. It's got some white on it, but that's fine. A little touch of phthalo green, yellow ochre. Let's have a little dabble and see what we can mix up. It's a fairly vibrant colour, isn't it? It's got a really sort of sharp colour. Now, here's a clue for you. Phthalo green, a little bit of a bully. I might be tempted to substitute something like a sap green colour, but you just have to play around and see what you can make. I added a tiny drop of alizarin crimson there. It's gone almost brown in colour. Maybe I can pull it back towards the green end of things. I think that's why I have to mix your colours. Now that's 3 different colours all mixed together there, but between the 3 of them, I've got myself a nice darkish green colour. Now, it's a probably a little bit too dark, so I'll put some white over to the side there. Now, the other thing you have to remember when you're starting out in your painting is that you don't have to be a slave to your reference picture. Let me pick that up for you. You know, if you don't paint that bank of trees in the background the same as the reference picture, who cares? As long as you get something in the background, as I say, faded, faint, far away, low detail, low effort. I've got a greenish colour here, which I think is going to work well. And I'm just going to literally just put in some background trees. And you notice I'm going to just literally dibbly-dobbly onto here. And I don't really mind if they are not perfect trees. This is background information. It's far, far away. Now, as I get down towards ground level, they become a little darker. I might go a little bit bigger with that tree there. We want a darker green colour, so there we go. Maybe a little more blue into that. Yeah, look at that lovely dark green colour. And maybe we'll just put a little bit of that shadow into there. Just been sort of filling in my shadow area there, keeping it nice and loose and letting it kind of break up. Remember, it's a long way away, no detail, therefore no real effort. Let's work on putting in the field next. Again, nice and pale in the background, getting a little stronger as we come forward behind this gate. From my colour chart, I see French ultramarine blue, cad yellow, maybe a touch of white will get me this lovely pea green colour. I'm going to mix that one up. And again, I just want a little texture back in there. And I'm going to just tap this on. Now, don't worry too much about your gate posts. We can always find them again if we paint them out. I think people worry about covering up their drawings a bit too much sometimes, and I think, well, you know, we can always find them. Look at the variety of colours here, from very pale yellow greens, some brighter green colours here, lots of little variations. I don't tend to mix up one big ball of colour and hope that it's going to do everything for me, because invariably, well, life's not really like that, is it? Life isn't just one colour. When you walk anywhere and go into the fields and walk around, you'll see 100 different values of green on the ground. So mix up a lot of different values, so you've got a nice wide variety. I think my background there could be just a little bit paler. It doesn't hurt to have a little bit extra here and there. Put a tree or a bush over here and it doesn't quite fill it in completely. You haven't got a bit of blank canvas looking back at you. I think that's not too bad. Pull that up, there we go, it's my reference. What do you think? I think it's good fun. Now, if any of this needs adjusting, when the painting is dried for a day or two, I can always come back and play with this if I need to, but I think for a beginner painting, this is a really good start. Having completed the background to our painting, we now need to start moving forwards into the midground. That's sort of these bushes and trees here. Now, you can see that the highlights are really kind of lovely in the centre here. And looking at how deep those shadows are, I think the light's coming from sort of just overhead. If it was earlier or later in the day, those shadows would be much further across the field. So you can sort of judge the time of day. I mean, not that you have to stick with it, but you can also see there's little pops of light on top of this little gate. Now, these sorts of observations, like the shadow on the ground, these will come with practice. But learn to study your reference photographs. They tell you a lot about what you might want to include in your own painting. There might be some little flowers in here. Definitely love these shadows on the ground. And all these things will enhance your own work. But as I say, it's time to start working on this midground area here. And I think we need to get into here with some lovely dark greens. There's a few nice tree trunks in here as well. We know how to mix dark green. We did it before. I gave my brush a little bit of a drying off. I've got our little colour chart. So phthalo green, a little bit of yellow ochre, maybe a touch of blue. There we go, got ourselves a really lovely dark green colour. Because my little lines have almost disappeared, when you're starting off putting on dark colour, there's always a chance you're going to run out of position. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to put on just a few, I'm just still using this old flat brush. I'm just going to put on what I call a few markers. In other words, I want to see how much room I need to leave there. And I'll put a little mark. So that tells me where to stop. To get down to the corner of the fence post. So you see I've got a sort of a rough outline, very broken. I'm not worried about these bits, I'm talking about this sort of slightly solid line in here. And then behind it there's an even darker line. And that's really quite back in here. And that's going to be really lovely and solid. I'll make that a little bit more defined. It sort of comes around into here, doesn't it? See, so what I've done is I've sort of done a couple of sort of layers here. Darker here, there's a tree, and then this inner here. So I've sort of just tried to break this up into sort of two, make that a bit more defined so you can see what I'm talking about. I make the edge a little stronger. So you can see I've really kind of broken this down into two zones. And I'll do the same on the other side. Again, just to put a few little markers in here. Maybe don't go quite so far across. Give yourself a little bit of breathing space. But this sort of thing will really help you when you're doing your own painting, not to run out of position. Now, that was a very quick little bit of time lapse there. And as you see, I really darkened up this outer edge, because in the reference photograph, your eyes are being drawn to the centre here. And I really kind of didn't leave very much background showing through. And as I went across, I let my brush run out of paint. There isn't a great deal of paint on this canvas yet. I think that's another challenge. We tend to want to sort of pile it on a little bit. And I'm just putting on little touches of colour here and there. You might also notice that I vary my colours quite a bit. I use various mixtures of blue and green and yellow. And I also start to include a little bit of alizarin crimson in this mixture. Alizarin crimson gives us a really super dark colour, really dark green. And just on this outer edge here, if I bring up the reference photograph, you see you want some really lovely deep dark green colours in here. And that's what alizarin crimson will do for you. It will make a lovely tone into your painting. Now, something else that's happening here, which will probably put off a few of the beginners amongst us, is as I'm doing all this, I'm starting to lose my gait. Well, look, I've got a palette knife here, and if you start losing something like your gait, just take your palette knife and just scratch out the design again. Do it whilst your memory is fresh, and whilst you can still see some of the little lines there, and it will really help keep you on track with your painting, so you won't lose too much here. Let's start working on the other side. And again, I'm going to use that trick, adding dark green and then making it darker still with some alizarin crimson. Some of these greens over here might not match some of these greens over here. So whilst you've got some of that on your brush, distribute a little bit of this around. So you've got a bit of a nice bit of harmony going on. Now, there's lots of lovely deep shadows here on the ground. And I just want to make sure I get a little bit of this green colour in here down into the corner. It's quite a good idea if you can darken corners. Again, when you're learning to paint, you want to keep people's attention somewhere in the middle of your painting, or to at least a hot spot like this gate. Having dark corners really kind of emphasises that a bit. It just gives us that little bit of extra attention to the middle of our painting if you darken up the corners. So there we go. I think that looks quite well. Now, as I come across into here, I'm going to add a few more little touches of dark, which I think are in shadow. Remember, the light's coming from behind this tree, and highlighting this tree a little more. So you can see here some of these shadows are quite strong. I'll bring the little reference up in the corner. Yeah, let's just bring that across the top there. Again, all the time I'm looking backwards and forwards, I'm looking at my reference and I'm looking at my painting all the time, seeing if I can spot any little shapes like that maybe. Looks like a little bit of a box poking out from the side of a tree. There we go, see that sort of funny looking shape there, like a box. There we go, I think that's just about it. Now, before I carry on, I should do some more questions and answers. How long do paints take to dry? Well, I started this painting yesterday, and I started off putting on a very, very thin coat of paint for my sky. As you can see, it is touch dry. It is just tacky, and I put another layer of paint on top, which is this very thin layer of green, and that is just touch dry, just a little on the sticky side. And this is another layer, so this is like 1, 2, 3 layers deep. And you feel that's just sticky. And I put these paint on here just in the last sort of half an hour to an hour. So you can see that within 24 hours, my painting has started already to become tacky. Now, exactly how long will it take to dry? Well, it depends a lot on the ambient temperature where you are. If you're in a very hot climate, this could be dry within literally a week. If you're in a very cold climate, this could take a month. By and large, reckon on a painting being touch dry in about a week's time. So there we go, as an average, about a week. Now, let's get on with putting on some more paint on my painting. For this one, I'm going to be using some nice cadmium yellow colour. And again, it's just stippling. I got my reference picture, so I'm going to have a quick look at that. I'm just going to start off by putting on some little speckles of light. Once again, I like to map this out. Now these little bits come right across into here. So again, I just put a few little dots on there just to give myself an idea of where to go, so I don't run out of position. Crucial little piece of advice I should mention is that when you're sitting very, very close to your painting, you really can't see what you've done. You almost can't tell where you've been with your painting. It's not till you sort of stand back, you look from the other side of the room, you suddenly think, well, maybe I should have done a little bit more of this, or I should have added a little bit more of that. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a little bit of dib-dabs and just slowly sort of edge my painting into the centre a little bit more, and I'm going to do a stand back. So you saw in that last little session there, I had to go back with my brush and fill in a bit more of my painting. I'll just grab my reference for you. I'd left that section undone there. I needed to put a bit more dark in, maybe a little bit more dark on this side as well. So I just went back in and put in some mid-green colours, but I'll go back to doing my highlights in just a moment. So yeah, I just sort of built that bit up a little bit more. It was a little bit under. My zigzag shape wasn't quite filled in enough. That's just a bit of a mistake. Now, the brush I was just using, I'd used it for every single part of my painting so far. I'd done my sky with it, my background trees with it, this field, on all these bushes. So one brush did all of that work. And I think this is, again, another point for a beginner to remember. Try and use the biggest brush you can use for as much of your painting as possible. It's so tempting to want to pick up a little brush to think you can do all of this work with this little tiny brush, and you'll spend a month of Sundays trying to make some impression upon your canvas. So the clue is always use the biggest brush possible for as long as possible. I've given this a wash because this needs to be washed and left to dry. Now I'm using water mixable oils, so I was able to wash this in some soap and water. But if you were using regular oil paints, you'd have to use something like thinners. Top tip now, don't forget, you still need to use linseed oil to thin your paints. Even though you can wash your brush in soap and water, you can't really use water to thin your paints down for your painting. It just doesn't work. It goes sort of wishy-washy and sort of, well, pretty rubbish actually. You do need to use something like a linseed oil. Anyway, this is damp and I'm going to put it to one side, and I'm finally going to go down a size in brush, but as I say, try and do as much as your painting as you can with the biggest possible brush. Right, let's add some more of these little highlights. Very deep chocolate brown colour. That's just French ultramarine, alizarin crimson, tiny touch of the phthalo green. You get this lovely, very deep chocolatey brown colour. And I'm just looking to put in just a little bit of detail. Now I'm using a liner brush for this. It should be one of those brushes which you do have in your kit. And learn to paint using just the very tip of the brush. Think of it more like a pen nib than a brush. And you just want to use the extreme point of the brush for adding in those fine details to your painting. And this takes a little practice for sure. And there'll be times when you land with a bit of a bump and you make a little bit of a blob, but that's okay. It's just the ideal place to put a bird's nest, I think. Or maybe just even put a few little touches of foliage over it. So just give that a little bit of wiggle and a bit of a jiggle on through here, and put in as many or as few as you want. I suspect you'll probably want to put on quite a few in this. Kind of give the painting a little bit of structure. I think somewhere buried over in here there's actually a tree branch or a trunk, and if you want to go in, you can lay your brush more on its side for this bit, and don't forget to give it a little bit of a wiggle. Okay, and we'll put some foliage over that to soften the whole effect, but give it a really good wiggle. And don't forget, just you can roll the brush in your fingers as well to get some nice. Now, top tip for you, corners. They're a bit of a magnet for our brushes, aren't they? We love to put things pointing at corners, and tree trunks and tree branches, they're drawn to the corners. And my advice is always to avoid painting anything going directly towards a corner. I'm going to put some more foliage over the top of these so you won't see as much of these tree trunks as I've put in, but I like to put them in now before I put the final foliage over the top. And you'll notice I've been saving me gate as I go. Anywhere that I need to make sure I can still see it, I've been scratching off the paint so I know where I'm going to go, but I can still see everything I need to see. Now then, one piece of bare canvas down here where we've got a nice sort of muddy bank or a nice path going through here, and I think we need to do this next. To mix up some nice brown colours, we could use cad yellow, alizarin crimson, French ultramarine blue. It gives me a dark sienna colour. I could make a Van Dyke brown, but it also needs the addition of some Prussian blue, which isn't in the kit. Now, this brush has dried sufficiently well for me to use it again. So I've got some yellow ochre, and I brought over a little bit of French ultramarine, just a touch, a little touch of the alizarin crimson, and very quickly you see I've got myself a nice sort of muddy brown colour. You're mixing mud. It's not hard when you're doing oil painting, trust me. I've mixed plenty of mud. Now let's have a little look. This looks like it's a nice sort of trackway going into this field here, and again I'm going to just put on a little touch this brown colour here. Now it might not be quite the right shade. I might have wanted it a little bit darker, but at this stage I just want to block in something from a painting at this stage. So again, this is blocking in. We'll get into fiddling around with the fine detail in a minute and say, I know this is going to need to be darker. Now here's a trick. See that lower rail on that gate? It's very tempting to want to paint your pathway and for it to be finishing at that point. It presents us with a sort of a visual barrier, and my advice is never let that stop you doing something extra. So I'm going to paint as though the gate's not there. I'm going to pretend it's opened, And so it looks like my track is going off and round to the right. So there we go. Remember, things don't want to be travelling uphill at this stage, folks, do they? We're looking out across the field. So all of these actions and these angles, they all want to be angled nice and flat, to be going round. Again, these are just the little things you'll pick up as you paint more and more and more. You'll realise that you've got to pay attention to these little shapes and curves. Maybe as I come down into the foreground, I might go a little bit darker. And of course, don't lose that bottom bar there. I can just about see it. Now, look, I've sunk a bit too low with that. I scraped off the wrong bit, but it's an easy fix, isn't it? There we go. That's it, an easy fix. So my little painting's progressing nicely, and I'm really pleased with what I've managed to achieve so far on a small canvas. But there's a couple more questions I need to address. The first one is, can I use oil paints with other mediums? By which I mean, can you use it in conjunction with, say, acrylics or watercolour? The answer is yes, but you have to get things in the right order. You can put oil paints over water-based products like acrylics, but not the other way around. You see, although acrylics stick very well to dry surfaces, they don't stick very well to oily surfaces. And of course, an oil painting stays oily, well, for its entire life. So underpainting with an acrylic or even using a watercolour is great. You can even use a pastel, but not my best advice on that one. Stick to an acrylic. It gives you a much better result. So another question is, beginner-friendly techniques for oil painting. Well, I've been using two different techniques with this particular painting. First one is called an underpainting, and that could be done in acrylics, but it can also be done in oils. You see, I did all of my background sky, those trees in the background, the little shadows and the field. I did that a day or two ago and I let it dry. It means that I could put another wet layer of oil paint straight on top with nothing mixing. So that's an underpainting technique. Now, another phrase that I hear bandied around in the art world is fat over lean, and this confuses people tremendously. All it means is that you have an underpaint, like the dark green colour here, which is firm and dry. Lean, in other words, it doesn't contain very much oil. And the fat is a highlight colour. So maybe like these little dots of lime colour on here, or even these tree trunks where I've put some linseed oil into my paint. I've made it fat. In other words, a fat paint sticks easily to a lean paint. And Bob Ross would say, a thin paint sticks to a thick paint. It means the same thing, it's just different phrases. So, what have I got left to do on my painting? I think just a little bit more foliage, maybe a little bit of work here on the ground and some gate posts, and I think we'll have a finished painting. So, let's press on with it. I think the next stage is to try and sink this tree and these branches back into my painting. You notice I painted those on top of that dark, firm, dry layer underneath, but that's the problem, they look like they're stuck on the surface, and I need to just do something with it. So I'm going to I've got just take the small brush back again. I just give it a little bit of a dry clean on a piece of paper towel. Just going to pick up some of this light highlighting colour, and I just want to drop in the suggestion of a little bit of highlight. I think looks like there's a little bit of nice little bit of ivy growing on there. I forgot the word then for the minute, and maybe a little bit of foliage. So all we want to do is just put in a little bit of something here, just to sort of take your eye off of it. I think the light would be coming in this way. So if I just add a little pop of light on the side of my tree, put in a little bit of the ivy growing around the tree trunk, so it looks like it's sort of set back in the painting. Such an easy technique to do. And on the other side, I think this tree trunk's in a little bit more shade, so I've got a slightly darker colour. Again, just going to paint through it. just the gate to do, and maybe a little bit of work on this pathway. When it comes to painting the gate, I have a choice of items I could use. I could use a palette knife. I could use something like this nice dagger brush, which comes from a nice edge. I could even use a liner brush to do it. But I think a palette knife does a really good job on any of these sort of hard shapes because, well, it's got a really nice sort of hard shape to it already. So that'll probably be good for doing straight lines. Now, this was quite an expensive branded item, but just to prove you can do it with a really cheap one, I got this out of my box of, well, stuff. Stuff that's been donated to me. I don't know where this came from, but maybe it's about as cheap as you can get, a plastic handle and all. So let's make our dark brown chocolatey colour with this palette knife and see if we can get it on our painting. I need to use some yellow ochre, some ultramarine and some alizarin crimson. As you can see, my paints are starting to dry out. But I'll mix these all together and make it a really dark chocolatey brown colour. Green in there as well, just to really deepen the colour up a little bit. And you want to press the paint down really lovely and flat, and then slide the knife in and just gather up a little roll. Now that is a tiny little roll of paint just on the edge of my palette knife. And you want to just hold your knife and make sure you sort of get on the, what I call the face knife. If this was a tennis racket, it'd be on the forehand side. And we're going to just literally touch the canvas. And now, again, this is another reason why scratching off the paint is quite a good idea, because it means that you're actually going to go straight onto the canvas. You're not going to be fighting over a lot of wet paint. If you need to steady your hand, you can. I tend to sort of sometimes hold on to the bottom of my easel, and I just use the back of my hand. But you could use a stack of books, put your elbows on that, and you just touch. Just leave a little impression of the palette knife. And it doesn't matter if it's not perfect. It can be a little bit bobbly. Let's say this is an old rustic gate. If you ever wonder why Bob's cabins were never pristine, he always used to say to himself, it's an old cabin full of character, which is shorthand for it doesn't matter if it's not quite upright. See, there's always a reason for doing these things. And again, I'll do this with a little bit of time lapse, but the same technique all the way through. Bit of artistic license here. I just added on a few staves for maybe an old fence that's sort of partially fallen away into disrepair. So I just added those to the side of my old fence and my old gate. Now, top tip here, once you get this done, don't fiddle with it. I can't tell you how many times I've seen lovely gateways fiddled with and damaged just because someone couldn't resist doing what I'm doing, which is to go back in here and try and smarten everything up and neaten everything up, make everything look perfect. These are old and rustic. They're not supposed to be perfect. Just make sure you've got a couple of decent sides on it and maybe a thicker top rail and a thicker bottom rail. That's about the only thing I would do. We have a quick look at our reference photograph up here in the corner. You can see what I mean about some light on the ground here, some abstract shapes. It's just sunlight coming through the trees. Maybe you even have a reflection or a shadow thrown by this gate. But I think the shadow of the gate is probably right at the foot of the gate. It wouldn't be thrown all the way over here looking at the shadow under the background. So we just need some abstract patches of light. And I've got this little brush back. I've got a little touch of ochre, a little touch of white, got a little bit of green mixed in with it. Even a touch of our little brown colour. They just kind of calm it down a little bit. Doesn't want to be too bright. Just wants to be sort of something sort of light coloured like that. And you see, when I filled this in, I didn't overdo it. I just left a few little patches here unpainted, just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. Okay, let's just put some finishing touches in here with some grasses, and then we'll do the final finishing touches on the gate. close to finished now. I hope like my little bits of sunlight dappled across this little gate, and I put a little bit of a stone down here, and I put some really bright green grasses right behind it. And one last thing, this is a nod to Bob. I've made up some very pale blue colour here, and I just want to put a little suggestion of that blue colour down the back of my tree. Just a little touch here and there. And this is something called referred light. In other words, light that bounces back from maybe something else just out of shot. And it's a great way of lifting something out of your painting which might otherwise be sort of lost. I'm just using it, that little flat brush here, just sort of brought to, see how it just kind of pops that forwards. Gosh, Bob was a clever guy. He understood how to make things really stand out in his paintings. So there you have it. I hope my little video has answered some of those questions and maybe sort of just given you that little bit of a spark to get creative with your own oil paintings. And if you found the video useful, don't forget, give it a little thumbs up, tell your friends about it. You can even subscribe to the channel. And of course, if you've got your own questions, don't forget, drop them down in the comments below. Till next week, happy painting, people. Here's a couple of outtakes for you. Well, I've been demonstrating them in the sort of 6. The next question is, I've forgotten. 6.